Hi and welcome. In this Python data visualization tutorial, you will get 9 examples of plots you need to know. You will learn how to create the following plots using Python. First, we start with the scatter plot. Then we continue with the histogram, bar plot, time series plot, the box plot. And after that, we will continue by creating a heat map, a Correlogram, a Violin Plot, and then create Raincloud plots. Note, there are of course plenty of other types of data visualization examples you can carry out and do in Python, but these are some of the ones you need to know. All the examples in this video are going to be created with the Seaborn package except for the Raincloud plots. Here we are going to use a package called Petit Prince. This means that you need to have these packages installed on your computer. If you are unfamiliar with installing Python packages, you can see this blog post, which is also linked in the description below. When talking about the description below, you will find links to other data visualization videos as well as blog posts, but also the data sets that we will work with in this video. In fact, there's a link to a blog post explaining how to create all of the 9 Python data visualization examples in this video. Make sure to check it out as well. That said, let's start with the first data visualization example, the scatter plot. Okay, now we're ready for the first Python data visualization example, the scatter plot. So we will start by importing Pandas as PD. We're going to use Pandas to import the example dataset. You can find a link in the description below, or just read it from this URL as I do here. The next thing we are going to do is import Seaborn as SNS. Now we have the both packages we need, and there are a lot of things we can do here. We're going to start by creating a data frame. So pd.readcsv. You can find a link in the description below on how to read CSV files with Pandas as well. So I'm going to read it from an URL. So Vincent tab.io our datasets CSV datasets empty cars.csv, like that. Hopefully I did it correctly, so we can have a look at the data frame using df head. Yes, so we can see here, and we can start. We're going to use the scatterplot method. So we can create SNS scatterplot, and we're going to see here the parameters. So we have an X and a Y and a lot of different things. So it's just, in this example, we're only going to use the X and the Y to create the scatter plot. So let's do it. So let's put X, and we can take the WT here, put it here, it's the column name, the variable WT, put it as X variable. And as a Y variable, we can use MPG. And we're going to use data, the data frame we have, and we'll run it. And we can see here that we get a scatter plot with different dots. So that was the first of our Python data visualization examples. In the next, we're going to create a histogram. Okay, let's create a histogram using Seaborn then. So this is the second data visualization example. We use the same data set. We can again have a look at the variables, and we can take one of these, and Now we're going to use SNS dist plot. So let's have a look. So we have a number of parameters we can work with here, and in this simple histogram example we're only going to use one of the variables, so we can just select the WT again. So let's do this, and we get a histogram and a KDE plot. We could of course remove this. So that was that example. Okay, we're ready for the next Python data visualization example, and here we are going to create a bar plot. So we are going to use the same data set, and we can see here. So we're going to use the SNS bar plot. SNS bar plot. So here we're only going to use the X, and we are going to use cyl here, the different cylinders. And we're going to use Y. Here we're going to use MPG. MPG, remember to spell it correctly. And the last parameter we're going to use is data def. So here we're getting a bar plot. That was pretty simple. Okay, it's time for the time series plot. We changed data set here to one that I have already loaded here in my Jupyter notebook. You can find a link to this set in the description below. It contains total number of trips, journey time average, and stuff like this for trains between different stations. We have a column called year and a column called month here, so we can create time series plots here. And we're going to use month and the total number of trips. So we're going to use a line plot here. So we use SNS line plot, and the x-axis we want to have a month. We could use year here as well. And then on the y-axis we're going to put total number of trips, the number of trips, total number of trips. And data again is df because we have already loaded it. So let's see, let's run this, and we get a time series plot. So it seems like in July it's the most number of total trips. Okay, in this data visualization in Python example, we're going to create a box plot, and we're going back to the empty cars dataset. And again, you can find the link in the description if you haven't seen all the previous examples using this dataset. So I have already loaded this with Pandas, and we are going to use SNS box plot to create the box plot in Python. Now again, we have parameter x, and we can set x to, for instance, cyl. So we get each cylinder on the x-axis, and we can take, for instance, qsec as the y argument. And the data our parameter is going to be df, and let's run this, and you can see we get box plots. Okay, in this Python data visualization example, we're going to create a heat map. So we're using the same data set, empty cars again, that we have loaded here. So we are going to use the heat map method, and we can use it like this. SNS heat map. Here we're going to take a couple of columns just to show, but you can take all of your numerical dependent variables so you see in your data set how they correlate. So I'm going to put a Python dictionary within the brackets. This way I can select multiple columns in the Pandas data frame. So we take that one, this, and HP, and drat WT, QSEC, and we run this and we get a heat map. Okay, so we're ready for the 7th data visualization in Python example, and we are going to create a Correlogram here. We're going to use NumPy here, import NumPy as NP like this, and then we get the correlation or data frame core using the core method from the data frame object. And now we're going to create a mask. So we're going to mask the upper half of the correlation matrix. So we only plot the lower half of the triangle. We're going to use np3u and np ones like car dtype equals bool. And if I've spelled everything correctly, we should see the mask here. So here you can see that we have an array with the true and false values. So we have true in the upper, and now we're going to use SNS heat map again, and we have the correlation matrix and mask. We have the mask and we want it as a square true. And if we run this code now, you can see we get the lower triangle here, the correlation. Here you have the strength of the correlations. And if we set this to false, you can see it is not a square. Okay, we're ready for the 8th Python data visualization example here, and we're going to create a violin plot. Again, we use the empty cars dataset, so we can use the violin plot method from Seaborn. So SNS violin plot, and again, we can use something from the empty cars dataset like BS, and we can use Y WT and data equals df, and we run this, and you can see that we get 2 different distributions and box plots. In the final example, we're going to create a Raincloud plot using the package Petit Prince. So you need to have that installed to be able to create this kind of data visualization within Python. Okay, we're ready for the final plot in our series of Python data visualization examples, and we're going to create Raincloud plots using Petit Prince. So you need to have Petit Prince installed to do this plot, and we can import Petit Prince as PT, and we're going to use the same data set as previously, so we're going to type pt.raincloud, and then we put a categorical variable such as sil and on the x-axis, and then we can take qsec here, and data is df, and we run this, and you can see we get Raincloud plots. There are a lot of different parameters that you can work with using the Raincloud method from Petit Prince, and you can see a previous video which goes into a bit more detail on how to create Raincloud plots in Python. Okay, that was it. In this post, you have learned 9 Python data visualization examples. First, you have learned how to create a scatter plot, then a histogram, bar plot, time series plot, box plot, heat map, Correlogram, Violin Plot, and Raincloud plots. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and note that you can create most of these data visualization examples using Python packages such as matplotlib, or some can be created using Pandas and other packages. So that said, take care.